There are tapes Gorbachev never wanted the world to hear. Recordings, documents, testimonies sealed for decades. I found some of them, and they change everything. HBO showed you the drama, the suffering, the heroism. But there are layers underneath that story. Political decisions made years before the explosion, a cover-up that went far deeper than one reactor, and a design flaw that the state buried for 30 years. This is what they didn't show you, and why it matters. Let's go back further than April 26, 1986. The RBMK reactor was the Soviet nuclear program's pride. It was cheap to build, easy to fuel, domestically designed. But inside the RBMK was a secret its engineers knew. The reactor became more unstable at low power levels. This is called a positive void coefficient. It means less cooling water equals a runaway chain reaction. Western reactors had containment domes for exactly this reason. The RBMK had no containment dome. Soviet engineers knew this. They wrote it in reports. A 1983 report flagged the positive void problem directly. It was read, acknowledged, then filed away. Fixing it would mean admitting the reactor was dangerous. Admitting danger meant admitting failure, and failure was not permitted in the Soviet nuclear program. There was also a second design flaw, the control rods. Each control rod tip was made of graphite, not neutron absorber. When inserted, the graphite tip briefly increased reactor power. This was called the positive scram effect. It was documented. Operators at Chernobyl were never told about this flaw. HBO showed Legasov as the man who exposed the flaw. What HBO didn't fully show, he knew years before the explosion. Legasov had reviewed RBMK safety data. He had concerns. He raised some. But the system stopped him. His story is more complicated than a hero with a recorder. That complexity is what I want to examine today. April 25, 1986. Chernobyl Unit 4 is preparing for a safety test. The test had already been delayed 11 hours. Kiev's power grid needed the reactor running through the day. So the reactor sat in a dangerous limbo state for hours. Xenon gas built up inside the core, a poison to reactors. Xenon poisoning made the reactor nearly impossible to control. Anatoly Dyatlov ordered the test to proceed anyway. HBO shows this. But here is what they soft-pedaled. Dyatlov had run similar unsafe tests before. Many times, the culture of ignoring safety warnings was systemic. At 1:23 a.m., Toptunov initiates the emergency shutdown. This is the moment everything went catastrophically wrong. The graphite tips on every control rod hit the fuel simultaneously. Power surged to 100 times normal in 3 seconds. The steam explosion blew the 1,000-ton reactor lid off. A second explosion followed, possibly nuclear in nature. Soviet officials denied that second explosion for 20 years. No one outside the plant knew an open reactor was burning. Firefighters were called to what dispatch reported as a roof fire. Vasily Ignatenko and his crew arrived within minutes. They had no radiation suits, no dosimeters that could measure this. They climbed onto the reactor roof not knowing it was radioactive graphite. Those graphite pieces were emitting radiation fatal within hours. HBO captured Ignatenko's story beautifully through his wife. What's missing is that 28 first responders died, not 6. And that hundreds of thousands more were slowly being killed. The human scale of this disaster dwarfs what was depicted. By 3 a.m. on April 26th, Bryukhanov sent his first report to Moscow. He reported a radiation level of 3.6 Roentgen per hour. The actual level near the reactor core was 15,000 Roentgen per hour. How? The plant's dosimeters had a maximum reading of 3.6. The devices were off the scale, so the reported number was the scale. One engineer had a proper dosimeter. It read 200 Roentgen per hour. He reported it to the shift foreman, was told to put it away. The report that reached Moscow said, "No catastrophe. Reactor intact." This was the first lie in a cascade of institutional denial. Gorbachev's staff didn't wake him until 6 in the morning. Even then, the briefing minimized what had occurred. HBO showed Gorbachev as ultimately a reformer who came clean. The real timeline tells a more ambiguous story. The KGB was monitoring Chernobyl's cover-up in real time. KGB files declassified in 1991 show they knew the truth by 8 a.m. The city of Pripyat was not evacuated until 36 hours later. 50,000 people breathing in fallout for a day and a half. Soviet officials feared a public panic more than radiation. The delay was not negligence, it was policy. Meanwhile, the graphite fire was pumping radiation into the atmosphere. The world didn't know, not yet, not officially. Sweden detected the radiation first. On April 28th, a Swedish worker came in on his shoes. Radioactive particles. Sweden's government demanded answers from the Soviets. Only then did Moscow make any public announcement. 14 words. An accident at Chernobyl. Situation under control. Situation was not under control, not remotely. The graphite fire would burn for 10 more days. Radioactive material was released into the atmosphere every hour. 400 times more radiation than the Hiroshima bomb. That number was also suppressed in Soviet official reporting. The cover-up was not one man. It was the whole architecture of the state. HBO showed the miners and the divers, heroic scenes. What was omitted is the full scale of who was sent. The Soviet state mobilized 600,000 workers over 4 years. Coal miners, construction workers, military reservists, firemen. Many were not told the true radiation levels of their assignments. Dosimeters were issued. Many were already calibrated to underread. Others were told to put their dosimeters in their pocket, face down. Why? Because hitting the radiation limit meant pulling workers off site. The sarcophagus had to be finished, on political schedule. The robots failed first. Soviet and West German robots broke down. So human beings were sent up instead, for 90 seconds each. They called them bio-robots, their word, not mine. 3,800 people worked on that roof alone, each for 1 minute. The lead aprons they wore were largely ineffective against gamma rays. Gamma radiation went straight through everything they wore. The decontamination units set up at zone perimeters were theater. Internal contamination from breathing cannot be washed off. Cesium-137 binds to muscle tissue, strontium-90 to bone. They worked, came home, got sick, died years later in silence. The Soviet government told them they were fine. All records adjusted. Health records were classified. Veterans couldn't prove their exposure. This happened for a decade after the disaster. Quietly, systemically. One researcher tried to document liquidator deaths in the late 1980s. She was stripped of her institute position and her data confiscated. The full liquidator death toll is still disputed, still unknown. Estimates range from 4,000 to over 60,000 cancer deaths. The reason for the range: incomplete records. By design, 600,000 workers. We don't fully know what happened to them. HBO ended their story with heroism. Real history ends with silence. That silence is part of the Chernobyl story HBO left on the cutting floor. I want to spend the last part of this video on something crucial. What Chernobyl actually did to the Soviet Union's political future. Gorbachev said it himself in a 1996 interview. Chernobyl was perhaps the real cause of the Soviet collapse. Not Afghanistan, not economics alone. Chernobyl. Why? Because Chernobyl cracked the propaganda foundation of the USSR. The state claimed to be a scientific paradise, advanced, safe. The greatest scientific achievement of the USSR was nuclear energy. That achievement just irradiated half of Europe. The Soviet state could no longer convincingly claim it served its people. Glasnost, Gorbachev's openness policy, was accelerated by Chernobyl. Because foreign governments were demanding answers, publicly. West Germany found cesium-137 in vegetables, milk, children. Poland gave iodine to every child in the country within days. The Soviet Union gave its own children nothing for 3 weeks. Thyroid cancer in children around Chernobyl spiked years later. To documented 6,000 thyroid cancer cases in exposed children. Highly treatable if caught early. But the early window was lost. The 3-week delay in telling people cost children their thyroids. Back to the political story. The cost to the Soviet economy. The cleanup cost 18 billion Soviet rubles in 4 years. That's roughly equivalent to 700 billion US dollars in today's money. The USSR was already struggling with oil prices and grain imports. Chernobyl was the catastrophic weight added to a cracking system. By 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Gorbachev's glasnost, born partly from Chernobyl, made that possible. Chernobyl didn't just destroy a reactor, it destroyed a worldview. The idea that the collective Soviet system was infallible. That idea burned alongside Reactor 4's graphite. HBO captured the drama of individuals within that system. What's harder to dramatize is the system itself as the main character. That system made every decision that led to April 26th, from the reactor design to the training gaps to the test itself. And the individual humans were trapped inside it, including Legasov. Let's talk about Legasov properly, because his story is extraordinary. He was not just an honest scientist in a dishonest system. He was a party man, an insider, a true believer for most of his life. He helped build the RBMK program. He defended it at conferences. He knew of the positive void coefficient before 1986. His Vienna speech in August 1986 was itself partly controlled. Soviet officials reviewed and edited his speech before he gave it. He revealed enough to shock the world, but protected the state's core. He went home to professional destruction and internal exile. Twice passed over for the Hero of Socialist Labor Award. His colleagues stopped inviting him to conferences. He fell into a depression that deepened through 1987. During that time, he recorded his real account of Chernobyl. 6 cassette tapes, his full account of what went wrong. He was naming the systemic failure, not just Dyatlov, the whole architecture. On April 27, 1988, exactly 2 years after the explosion, he died. His tapes were found, copied, shared quietly through Moscow. Parts reached the West. Parts were broadcast on Radio Liberty. The tapes changed how historians understand the disaster. Gorbachev awarded Legasov the Hero of Russia title posthumously in 1996. 10 years after he died trying to warn the world, HBO honored his story, but compressed it into a neat hero arc. The reality is messier, more human, more tragic, and more instructive. A man who built the system, supported the system, was destroyed by it, and then tried to tell the truth about it when it was too late. That arc is the real story of Chernobyl for me. One thing the HBO series couldn't fully show: the present tense. The exclusion zone is 2,600 square kilometers. That's roughly the size of Luxembourg. Nature has largely reclaimed it. Bears, lynx, wild horses. Scientists debate whether the wildlife is truly thriving or just surviving. Some studies show genetic mutations in local bird and mammal populations. Others show populations stabilizing and even growing. Pripyat, the city built for plant workers, stands completely abandoned. 50,000 people left in 3 hours on April 27th. They never returned. They were told to bring 3 days of clothes, just in case. The amusement park that was scheduled to open May 1st still stands. It never opened, never carried a single passenger. The original sarcophagus, built in 1986, began failing within years. It was built by hand in deadly conditions, quickly, without proper plans. The new safe confinement arch was completed in 2016. It's the largest movable structure ever built, 36,000 tons of steel. It will contain the reactor for another 100 years. Hopefully. The reactor core still contains 200 tons of uranium and corium. The elephant's foot of corium is still too radioactive to approach. Chernobyl is an ongoing story, not a closed historical chapter. And in 2022, a new chapter opened that no one expected. Russian military forces seized the Chernobyl plant in February 2022. They held it for 5 weeks as part of the invasion of Ukraine. Troops dug trenches in the Red Forest, the most contaminated soil on Earth. Many of those soldiers likely don't know what that means. The Red Forest earned its name when trees turned red after 1986. The topsoil there contains cesium, strontium, and plutonium. Digging through it can release particles still in the air today. Radiation monitoring at the plant spiked during the occupation. Ukraine's Nuclear Regulatory Authority lost contact with the plant. For the first time since 1986, Chernobyl was in a crisis of control. Russian forces left in late March 2022. Ukrainian scientists returned. What they found was disturbing. Equipment ransacked, systems disrupted. The lessons of 1986 had not protected the plant in 2022. Chernobyl remains an active geopolitical reality, not just a historical drama, not just a story from the past. That's what struck me most in researching this. HBO made a masterpiece, but a masterpiece with a frame. And the real story doesn't fit neatly inside any frame. So what does the real Chernobyl story actually teach us? First lesson, flawed systems produce flawed outcomes. Always. You cannot blame individuals when institutions create the conditions. Dyatlov was real. So was the culture that trained him and promoted him. Second lesson, information suppression multiplies casualties every time. Every hour of delay in telling people about Chernobyl had a cost. We see this same pattern today in every major institutional failure. Third lesson, expertise must be protected from political interference. Legasov's tragedy was that he was brilliant, but politically constrained. He knew things, he couldn't say them freely. People died. Fourth lesson, the aftermath matters more than the event. Chernobyl didn't end in 1986. It's still happening. The thyroid cancer generation is still in treatment today. The liquidator's children are raising families of their own. The plant itself needs monitoring and maintenance for centuries. The zone will remain contaminated for at least 20,000 more years. That timescale should make any of us pause. Now, the current state of nuclear energy, because this is relevant. There are 440 nuclear reactors operating globally right now. None of them are RBMK reactors without major safety modifications. Post-Chernobyl, the RBMK flaw was fixed across all remaining units. Chernobyl made the world's nuclear industry demonstrably safer. That's the dark silver lining of a monstrous disaster. 600,000 people paid for that lesson with their bodies. 50,000 citizens of Pripyat with their homes. Legasov paid with his life. And the reactor paid with its name. Chernobyl is now a global noun. It means, this is what happens when we choose silence over truth. HBO gave us the drama. History gives us the responsibility. If you found this worth your time, dive into the source material. Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham. Start there. Voices from Chernobyl by Svetlana Alexievich. Essential reading. The truth is out there. It just takes longer to find than the drama. Chernobyl is still watching us, asking us if we've learned. I think the answer has to be yes. It has to be.